Good evening, this is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal, Mr. Pasty, and the Talking Head. It's Wednesday, February 9th, 2011. Remember, most importantly, I rant so you don't have to. By the way, if I do not have your email and you'd like to receive the script of each show, send me your email to my new email address at goldyrant@gmail.com. I apologize for speaking too fast last week. I was sick and just wanted to get through it. Also, I realized that I always have more information than time to get it out, especially at city council meetings, neighborhood meetings, etc. So when I speak, I always have that feeling of being limited to 3 minutes before the buzzer goes off and the mayor turns off your mic, but not the mic on the recording. Please take note. A good friend from the Northeast again asked me what I get out of this rant. It's actually a kind of therapy for me. I read the articles and watch the shows, and instead of my head exploding internally, causing irreparable harm, I'm able to publicly comment on the item, message, and you know the drill. Once it's out of my brain, it's released from the anxiety-creating aspect of my brain. I'm really tired and relieved after a rant. By the way, a friend of mine asked me yesterday at basketball what I read to get my facts, and I replied that I watched Fox, Free Speech TV, I read the New York Times and the Austin American-Statesman. He replied, "You get your facts from the Statesman?" And I said, "I get my stream from the Statesman. I don't assume I'm getting any facts from anyone, just message, continuous message. And from that message, I can see." Think about it. When someone you agree with is speaking, do you look at what they're saying or do you nod your head? If you disagree, you're skeptical and you look for things. If you agree, you don't look at what they're saying critically. So with Free Speech TV, I have to be more skeptical. But my Tea Party friend, you're the one that needs to watch MSNBC. I can't watch those guys. And don't watch Fox, buddy. As I was typing tonight, the Judge Napolitano on Freedom Watch, was talking about licensing requirements for barbers and people that shampoo in Florida and Texas. They're complaining about economic protectionism on these licensing requirements. The judge is not getting to the correct point, and that is in Texas, which the judge used as an example. If you are convicted of a felony, you cannot be a barber or any other number of license required professions. I just sent an email to the judge detailing same. By the way, you can be a lawyer if you are a felon. Also, there was a Patriot Act victory, I believe today, for us in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I will go into that next week. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about Austin Community College's ability to function on less money and a smaller budget. I'm finally going to talk about the A word, abortion. I'm going to talk about the drug war and pro-drug war spending messaging that continues to happen. Glenn Beck is currently using his bully pulpit to espouse his latest conspiracy theory. Glenn has been on a conspiracy tirade lately, actually for a long time, which is that the Muslim Brotherhood is leading the protest against the Mubarak regime in Egypt, and that they are looking to, with the help of American labor unions, form a holy worldwide jihad with these same American labor unions. Tea Party friend, it is your duty to watch MSNBC, not Fox, as I said. I will handle Fox. February 8th, 2011 on Fox News. Israeli Prime Minister says Egypt may end up like Iran. In this blurb, they show a part of his speech that says, and a third possibility is that Egypt could end up like Iran. So they clip in, they cut in to the part where he says, and a third possibility is that Egypt could end up like Iran. The headline does not say the third possibility. You know which way Fox is going, preservation of the torturous regime's status quo. Some of you may remember when my head exploded. It was the corporate imperialism #2 rant dated October 20th, 2010. In that rant, I read an editorial from the Austin American-Statesman where the editors recommended voting to expand the Austin Community College, ACC, their taxing authority to various adjacent counties. Right now it's in Travis County, in Williamson County. This editorial had many things wrong with it on its face. I lost it in a Tea Party type of way. For example, they stated that this allowed people to take pottery classes and that only 20% of people graduated. I couldn't take it and said so. I suggested that if you wanted further education, you go buy some classics and read them. Well, there's a huge deficit brewing in Texas, and the legislature is currently meeting. They meet every 2 years. There's an article in the Statesman dated February 4th, 2011 entitled, "Is ACC Well Positioned to Cope with Planned Cuts?" Let me give you a few tastes of the article. ACC officials say they would have to raise tuition by a yet-to-be-determined amount, curtail spending on capital equipment and technology, and hire fewer adjunct faculty members, leading to larger classes. Now, I cannot imagine a pottery class going from 20 to 28 people. How am I going to learn how to operate the kiln? All things considered, and this is back to the article, all things considered, we're coping with the instability of state funding in a manner that preserves our programs and service levels to the public, which is and should be our highest priority, said Stephen Kinslow, ACC's president. Talking about losing $3.5 million, Bill Holda in East Texas said in referring to the inability to raise taxes, quote, "That leaves equally unsavory options, such as billing $100 a day rather than the current $5 or $10 a day for police officer and firefighter training, or doubling to $300 the charge to students taking dual credit courses that count simultaneously for high school and college." What? What the F are we doing having students take high school classes in ACC? And why am I subsidizing firemen and police job training so recruits can pass the entrance exam? I don't get a subsidy for my broker's license or my law license. ACC's balance sheet has been pretty strong lately. This is back to the article. With revenue exceeding expenses by $7.2 million for the budget year that ended August 31st. So they're running a surplus and are unhappy with cuts. Back to the article. One built-in cost saver, unlike some large community college systems which have a president and other administrative officials at each campus, ACC with 41,582 students operates as a single college with district-wide administration. This is very interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it shows that they operate a little lean and mean. And two, maybe our public schools need to experiment with eliminating some school-specific positions such as principal and other administrators that are duplicated at other schools. But most importantly, the system was able to figure out how to do the same services with less money. And of course, increasing the size of the pottery classes. Doesn't that upset you, though, that they were able to make do? It is a reason that, as whiny as he is, Neil Cavuto on Fox is onto something, calling for budget cuts at the federal level. It is true, anecdotally, that there's a lot of waste everywhere. And non-anecdotally, these bureaucracies feed on themselves, and once they reach a certain size, they exist only to see their existence continued and their size increased. That always happens. It happens in revolutions, it happens in churches, it happens in corporations, it happens everywhere. One more item is interesting in the article, and it makes me proud. Quotes, "In recent years, voters in Del Valle, Round Rock, Hayes, and Elgin school districts have agreed to join ACC's taxing territory. The string of annexation approvals was broken for the first time in November 2010 by voters in the San Marcos, Bastrop, and McDade school districts." That was when my head exploded. Take that, editors of the Statesman. I hope there were other voices out there besides mine that opposed those annexations and had an effect. Slightly related to that head explosion regarding ACC was another story that I ranted on regarding the $30 million cost overrun at the new Austin Central Library, which was already going to cost $90 million and is now going to cost $120 million for a central public library for books that no one reads. Additionally, I talked about how our mayor, Lee Leffingwell, misspoke, which is a very polite word, when he said that the bond package that was up for election in 2010 would not increase our local property taxes, since obviously it is tax revenues that pay back these bonds. Now that's a long-winded way to get to an article in the Austin American-Statesman by regular contributor Ben Ware on February 7, 2011, entitled, Metro Rail seeing ridership boost from midday runs. The article is generally talking about our new rail line in Austin that runs from Leander to downtown. There have been plans for a long time to expand that line to the airport and to the University of Texas, as well as an expansion of downtown connectors by bus and maybe streetcar. They've tried streetcars before. That is a part of the problem that I ranted about last week regarding phased capital improvements by state agencies that get you hooked in with a first phase and then force you to continue with further phases. George Costanza style, can't stop now. To the article. Mayor Lee Leffingwell and other city officials have been talking about having a city bond election in November 2012 to authorize $200 million or $300 million of local money for the first phase downtown. Their assumption is that another large chunk, perhaps 50% of the overall cost, would come later from the Federal Transit Administration's New Starts program. But now something called the Republican Study Committee, which has existed since 1973 and has 175 conservative members of the U.S. House on its membership list, would like to eliminate New Starts. They say it would save $2 billion a year, and it's part of a bill filed in Congress in January that purports to save $2.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Amtrak funding would go away too under this proposal. Wow. The mayor wants to sell a new bond package, hoping that one half is going to come from the federal government, to say nothing about selling $200 million to $300 million worth of bonds in Austin, which has the highest per capita indebtedness in the country. My God, there's no money for this. But since it is not his money, or the city council's, it's so easy to spend it. And since the mayor has convinced himself that bonds are somehow different than a tax increase, he says to the people of the city of Austin, this will not make your taxes go up. This will not make your taxes go up. Bullshit. All right. I've never really talked about abortion, at least on this rant, but I think I will tonight. It's a highly charged, message-oriented, moral issue. I haven't even talked about what the word moral means. When I say message-oriented, right-wing Republican groups such as the ACLJ and James Dobson's group are using it to attack Obamacare. Rick Perry and Sarah Palin are using it to promote their candidacies to their core constituencies in their runs for president. The Republicans are attempting to find a wedge issue for the 2012 election, much as they used gay marriage as a wedge issue in 2004 to defeat John Kerry. My friend in Houston, Scooter, always likes to use the argument that a woman has the absolute right to do with her body as she wants, and that the fetus is a part of her body. Some evangelicals have used the argument that there is a life there from conception, sperm and egg, that deserves protection. You've heard me opine that I feel that it is wrong that you need to get a license to drive a car, but you don't need a license to have a baby. More on that discussion later. I'll tell you what, in constitutional law, this discussion was very, very interesting. Let's go to Wikipedia for some underlying guidance, and they put it better than I could ever put it. The abortion debate refers to discussion and controversy surrounding the moral and legal status of abortion. The two main groups involved in the abortion debate are the pro-choice movement and the pro-life movement. Each movement has, with varying results, sought to influence public opinion and to attain legal support for its position. In Canada, for example, abortion is available on demand, while in Nicaragua, abortions are illegal. In some cases, the abortion debate has led to the use of violence. In ancient times, abortion, along with infanticide, had been considered a matter of family planning, gender selection, population control, and the property rights of the patriarch. Rarely were the rights of the prospective mother, much less the prospective child, taken into consideration. Although generally legal, the morality of abortion, birth control, and child abandonment as a form of infanticide was sometimes discussed. Then, as now, these discussions often concern the nature of man, the existence of a soul, and the beginning of human personhood. I would add consciousness to that. While the practice of infanticide as a form of family planning has largely died out, child abandonment, birth control, and abortion are still very much with us. and their morality and legality continues to be debated. While modern debates about abortion retain some of the language of these older debates, the terminology has often acquired new meanings. Thus, while quickening was once seen as evidence that the spirit of reason had animated the fetus, few modern people would consider the fetus to be a reasonable creature in any sense of the term. That's a little bit of opinion there. Any discussion of the putative personhood of the fetus will be complicated by the current legal status of children. They are not full persons at law until they have reached the age of majority and are deemed able to enter into contracts and sue or be sued at law. However, for the past 2 centuries, they have been treated as persons for the limited purposes of offense against the person law. Furthermore, as one American judge noted, if a fetus is a person, it is a person in very special circumstances. It exists entirely within the body of another, much larger person, and usually cannot be the object of direct action by another person. Excuse me. While this judgment discusses the logistical difficulties of treating the fetus as an independent being, it should be noted that the other person being talked about is, with the exception of underage unwed mothers, usually a person in the full legal sense of the term. Opinions in the current debate range from complete prohibition, even if done to save the woman's life, to complete decriminalization, as with abortion in Canada. God bless the Canadians, huh? Many of the terms used in the debate are seen as political framing, terms used to validate one's own stance while invalidating the opposition's. For example, the labels pro-choice and pro-life imply endorsement of widely held values such as liberty and freedom, while suggesting that the opposition must be anti-choice or anti-life. Alternatively, pro-coercion or pro-death. Such terms gloss over the underlying issue of which choice or life is being considered and whose choice or what kind of life is deemed most important. Appeals are often made in the abortion debate to the rights of the fetus, pregnant woman, or other parties. Such appeals can generate confusion if the type of rights is not specified, whether civil, natural, or otherwise, or if it is simply assumed that the right appealed to takes precedence over all other competing rights, an example of begging the question. The appropriate terms with which to designate the human organism prior to birth are also debated. The medical terms embryo and fetus are seen by pro-life advocates as dehumanizing. There's a House episode about this, by the way. The terms baby and unborn child are seen by pro-choice advocates as emotionalized. Similarly, there's a debate between use of the terms woman and mother. With each successive generation of abortion debate, the terminologies employed often evolve to give a fresh appearance to a particular opinion, even if the underlying viewpoints have not changed, especially after the failure of a previous campaign to lawmakers. Newer labels used include pro-abort, employed by the pro-life movements to imply that pro-choice advocates actually encourage abortion, and pro-love, employed by some pro-choice advocates to imply they support families born out of love and not religious necessity. Many other pro-labels exist, often created by individuals impromptu, to dodge a political debate or criticism from their peers when an abortion topic comes up. That's what I call message words. Politics refer to the processes defined and limited through legal documents by which decisions, laws, are made in governments. In politics, rights are the protections and privileges legally granted to citizens by the government. In a democracy, certain rights are considered to be inalienable and thus not subject to grant or withdrawal by government. Regarding abortion law, the political debate usually surrounds a right to privacy and when or how a government may regulate abortion. There is abundant debate regarding the extent of abortion regulation. Here's a good quote. Some pro-choice advocates argue that it should be illegal for governments to regulate abortion any more than any other medical practices. I'm wondering about these pro-choice advocates and what they're saying about their positive nature of Obamacare. Everybody speaks out of both sides of their ass. On both sides of the debate, some argue that governments, this is back to Wikipedia, some argue that governments should be permitted to prohibit elective abortions after the 20th week, viability, or the second trimester. Some want to prohibit all abortions starting from implantation. The right to privacy, while not spelled out in the Constitution of most sovereign nations, nonetheless is understood to be foundational to a functioning democracy. I agree. In general, the right to privacy can be found to rest on provisions of habeas corpus, which first found official expression under Henry II in 11th century England, but is precedent in Anglo-Saxon law. This provision guarantees the right to freedom from arbitrary government interference, as well as due process of law. This conception of the right to privacy is operant in all countries which have adopted English common law through acts of reception. The law of the United States rests on English common law by this means. Time has stated that the issue of bodily privacy is the core of the abortion debate. Time defined privacy in relation to abortion as the ability of a woman to decide what happens to her own body is what they mean. In political terms, privacy can be understood as a condition in which one is not observed or disturbed by government. And I use the actual privacy in talking about surveillance. Traditionally, American courts have located the right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment, Ninth Amendment, 14th Amendment, as well as the penumbra of the Bill of Rights. The landmark decision Roe v. Wade relied on the 14th Amendment, which guarantees that federal rights shall be applied equally to all persons born in the United States. The 14th Amendment has given rise to the doctrine of substantive due process, which is said to guarantee various privacy rights, including the right to bodily integrity. In Canada, the courts have located privacy rights, including the right to in Canada, the courts have located privacy rights in the Security of Persons Clause of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 7 of that charter echoes language used in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which also guarantees security of persons. Eileen L. McDonough explains privacy in U.S. law. Although not widely understood, there are in fact two components to the right to bodily integrity and liberty: the right of a person to choose how to live her own life, and the right of a person to consent to the effects of a private party on her bodily integrity and liberty. In the context of constitutional guarantees, a person's right to consent to what is done to her body is an even stronger right than a person's right to choose what to do with her life. Since there are two components to the right to bodily integrity and liberty: choice and consent. Once the state designates the fetus as an entity separate from the woman, her right to terminate pregnancy stems not only from her right to make a choice about her liberty, but more fundamentally from her right to consent to how the fetus, as another entity, affects her body and liberty. While governments are allowed to invade the privacy of their citizens in some cases, they are expected to protect privacy in all cases lacking a compelling state interest. In the U.S., the compelling state interest test has been developed in accordance with the standards of strict scrutiny. In Roe v. Wade, and again, strict scrutiny is used for fundamental rights, of which the right to possess firearms was just made a fundamental right. In Roe v. Wade, the court decided that the state has an important and legitimate interest in protecting the potentiality of human life from the point of viability on, but that prior to viability, the woman's fundamental rights are more compelling than that of the state. Excuse me. The pro-life position argues that while abortion is a private matter, abortion regulation is valid because the state interest in protecting prenatal life is compelling. The pro-choice position argues either that there is no state interest in regulating abortion or that the woman's privacy is a more compelling interest. Roe v. Wade struck down state laws banning abortion in 1973. Over 20 cases have addressed abortion law in the United States, all of which upheld Roe v. Wade. Since Roe, abortion has been legal throughout the country. But states have placed varying regulations on it, from requiring parental involvement in a minor's abortion to restricting late-term abortions. Legal criticisms of the Roe decision address many points. Among them are several suggesting that it is an overreach of judicial powers, or that it was not properly based on the Constitution, or that it is an example of judicial activism and that it should be overturned so that abortion law can be decided by legislatures. Justice Potter Stewart, who joined with the majority, viewed the Roe opinion as legislative and asked that more consideration be paid to state legislatures. Candidates competing for the Democratic nomination for the 2008 presidential election cited Gonzalez versus Carhart as judicial activism. In upholding the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, Carhart is the first judicial opinion upholding a legal barrier to a specific abortion procedure. Quotes, where, in the performance of its judicial duties, the court decides a case in such a way as to resolve the sort of intensely divisive controversy reflected in Roe, and those rare comparable cases, and this is in 505 U.S. 833, decision has a dimension that the resolution of the normal case does not carry. Okay. Its decision has a dimension that the resolution of the normal case does not carry. It is the dimension present whenever the court's interpretation of the Constitution calls the contending sides of a national controversy to end their national division by accepting a common mandate rooted in the Constitution. Whatever the premises of opposition may be, only the most convincing justification under accepted standards of precedent could suffice to demonstrate that a later decision overruling the first was anything but a surrender to political pressure and an unjustified repudiation of the principle on which the court staked its authority in the first instance. That's the majority opinion of Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Quite to the contrary, by foreclosing all democratic outlet for the deep passions this issue arouses, by banishing the issue from the political forum that gives all participants, even the losers, the satisfaction of a fair hearing and an honest fight, by continuing the imposition of a rigid national rule instead of allowing for regional differences, the court merely prolongs and intensifies the anguish over abortion. This was Justice Antonin Scalia, concurring in the judgment in part and dissenting in part. Now, I define judicial activism as a Supreme Court opinion that goes against the way you wanted them to rule. Think about the George W. Bush Florida election decision, the Kelo eminent domain case, and my favorite, the Citizens United case, that allows corporations and other groups to donate as much as they want to a political campaign, as such groups have free speech rights. There is no such thing as an activist Supreme Court. They may follow stare decisis, that's staying on track with prior cases, in which case we would still have separate but equal restaurants and drinking fountains for blacks and whites. All right, now I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just saying. In law school, the discussion would, all right, when we talk about abortion, in law school, the discussion would start with a case, maybe Roe versus Wade or another abortion case. The professor would poll the students, and havoc would ensue. As I spoke about today at the Y, I liked how we would first try and determine when life begins. Conception, production of sperm or an egg, birth, viability. We then, without looking at the legality of the issue, looked at limitations that stop a life from occurring. So when you use a condom, you're stopping a life. When you use the pill, you're stopping a life. When you get a vasectomy, you're stopping a life. We then started talking about when does the life actually begin. Production of sperm or an egg, conception, viability, birth, consciousness, majority. We then realized, or were made to realize, that birth is an arbitrary point on the line to determine when life begins. As medical science has advanced, we've gone from maybe a 1-month premature baby being able to survive to a fetus, notice the message word, being able to be kept alive after 6 weeks, but at what cost? As you go through these discussions, notice there is no moral discussion yet. We then started talking about the rights of the woman carrying the baby. What happens in cases where the woman will die if she has the baby? What about cases of rape? And what about just an accusation, but not a conviction for rape? Date rape, incest, etc. We then started talking about the policy implications, the rights of society, of abortions, or legalized murders of a fetus, or whatever message words you want to use. Remember, criminal complaints are initiated by society, the prosecutor, not an individual or a family of an individual. So our society has to give the rules under which prosecutors go to a grand jury to determine if there has been an unlawful murder. These discussions in law school take many weeks, depending on your professor. I'm not saying the average Joe is unqualified to discuss these issues, but you don't ever hear about this extended analysis of this multifaceted issue. I do generally hear this: I'm against abortion and all life is sacred. Then you hear about, how capital punishment is okay, and end-of-life assisted suicide is okay. End of that argument. Here's another one I hear: the rights of the woman are sacred. Well, what about cases where the baby's viable, even without intensive care, or there's a willing couple ready to adopt? It may be that abortion is purely a case of opinion. There is no answer. Let me throw out an opinion. I think no one should be allowed to have a baby unless they have proven their ability to financially raise the child. The parents have taken a 1-year course on child raising and have taken an exam as tough as the bar exam to prove they should get a license to have and raise the child. Otherwise, Abortion should be mandatory. I'm obviously not going to run for office. We do not have any money to help you raise your children, feed your children, clothe your children, educate your children, provide for health care for your children, or provide for retirement of your children. Next week, I will talk about the proposed bills restricting abortion, further restricting abortion in the Texas legislature and their messages. Moving on to the drug war. Third war. This was on Fox News, February 3rd, 2011. American missionary killed by drug cartel in Mexico. All along the border, Americans are being killed. It is true that a missionary was killed in Mexico by someone who wanted their truck. January 27th, 2011, Nancy Davis, a missionary doing God's work, was shot in the head by Mexican drug cartels. What a message by Fox. January 28th, 2011, Austin American-Statesman article entitled Police, U.S. Missionary Shot Dead Over Truck. In this article, it's detailed that they have no idea why the woman or the very expensive truck was targeted. However, halfway down the article, in talking about maybe where the shooting occurred, quotes, an official in Mexico's Tamaulipas State Attorney General's office said the assault happened about 7 miles south of Reynosa on the highway connecting San Fernando with the border. The area is one of Mexico's most violent and dangerous and is controlled by the drug cartel, said the official, who did not want to be identified because he is not authorized to discuss the case. It's actually because he doesn't want to be killed. It looks like Fox and the mainstream media outlets this article was distributed by AP are back on the drug war bandwagon. In other words, they use a murder for a truck to link it to the normal facts that they report, that this city is controlled by a drug cartel. By the way, the border cities in the U.S. are actually among the safest in the U.S. How many people in U.S. cities die of stray bullets or carjackings or crack deals gone bad? You never hear that number. Fox News, February 8, 2011. They are again talking about the third war. Apparently, 3 teenagers, 2 of them Americans, were killed at a car dealership in Ciudad Juarez. They warn you and show you a graphic picture of the crime scene. This city is the location of a fierce drug cartel turf war. As the article in the Statesman reported, there was no link to drug cartels. Fox made the link in their story. Fox did a story with an analyst that talked about small towns that don't get as much press as the large cities. They proceeded to list through dead and disappeared police chiefs. In these small towns, the drug cartels control the streets. The chief of a town in Mexico, they showed her photo, was dragged from her house by 10 men and watched her own house burn. She has not been seen since that abduction. These people 1 mile from the border live in the Stone Age. No one knows or even records how many people have died, where a nation's flag flies in surrender. Police chiefs being killed by drug cartels. So Fox used the deaths of the boys to connect the crime to the drug cartels. Very, very cool how they do that. And the only way to know that is you have to watch a news cycle. You can't just turn on O'Reilly, or you can't just watch Jon Stewart and think you've been watching Fox. You got to watch a news cycle. That means 3 hours in a row of the first 10 to 15 minutes when something like this happens. It starts out with no linkage, and then it becomes a linkage. They're great. Like Mubarak, let's give the Mexican president and his cronies billions to buy arms from our manufacturers. Similarly, an Austin American-Statesman article on page B6, buried, entitled, Slain Teens Were Car Shopping in Juarez, Friends Say. AP distributed this one as well, and this was yesterday. Just like the earlier article about the woman shot for her truck, this article details that the slain teens were car shopping. Chihuahua prosecutor spokesman Arturo Sandoval said authorities have no leads on suspects or a motive. Here comes the key linkage. In the article, this is in Fox. Juarez is the center of a fierce turf war between the Sinaloa and Juarez drug cartels. More than 3,000 people were killed last year in the city of 1.3 million residents. It is the exact type of linkage as Fox News and the earlier article about the missionary. The exact same type of linkage. That's what we do here in the rant. Look for the linkage. They create their own linkage. Now, why do they do that? Are they doing it for news? Of course. They're trying to sell advertising time. But to me, it's a much more nefarious reason. They have advertisers that sell arms. Rupert Murdoch believes in it. All right. This is from an email from Americans for Safe Access, a medical marijuana, sorry Scooter, lobbying organization. It shows how the Obama administration is just more of the same, which means the same as Bush, the same as Clinton, the same as Bush Sr., the same as Reagan. Michigan case could set precedent for medical cannabis programs. Americans for, and notice how they use cannabis there, Scooter. Americans for Safe Access has filed papers on behalf of patient privacy in a widely watched federal case that could set a national precedent. ASA is opposing an attempt by the Justice Department to subpoena patient information from Michigan's medical cannabis program. Justice Department, Obama's. The Obama administration is suing the Michigan Department of Community Health, DCH, to obtain the records of 7 state-registered patients. DCH has refused to release the documents based on privacy provisions in Michigan's medical cannabis law. Yay! Patient privacy is a critical ethical obligation of medical and public health officials, said ASA Chief Counsel Joe Elford, author of the amicus brief filed today. Federal officials should not be able to violate that right to privacy, especially for state-qualified medical cannabis patients who are vulnerable to prosecution under federal law. In July and December of last year, the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration raided several patient cultivators who were participating in the Michigan medical cannabis program. In July and December of last year, Obama administration. So far, 2 caregivers have been indicted on federal charges, and the DEA is seeking all Michigan state program records for 7 individuals who have not been publicly named. This is what I warned people about in 1995 when California passed their medical marijuana law. People were giving their names and get this little license so that they can go get their little recommendation, because you can't get a prescription. It's illegal to get a prescription for marijuana. But I warned several people, your name would go on a list. Michigan's medical cannabis law makes it a misdemeanor criminal offense to disclose that confidential patient or caregiver information. But the incoming Attorney General, Bill Chouette, a vocal opponent of the state program, has indicated he will turn over the records if the federal court can immunize him from liability under the law. Talk about activism. Follow your law, Chouette. A federal court hearing in February heard arguments that disclosing private records will have a chilling and harmful effect on patients throughout the U.S., given the continuation of aggressive federal enforcement actions under the Obama administration. In addition to ASA's brief, Cannabis Patients United, CPU, has also filed opposition to the subpoenas, and the Michigan Association of Compassion Clubs, MACC, a group of more than 40 Michigan patients and providers, is attempting to intervene as an affected party in the case. In 2007, a federal district court quashed similar subpoenas that sought the private records of 17 registered patients in the Oregon medical marijuana program. In 2007, during the Bush administration. I have to ask, are you okay with your federal tax dollars being used to oppose medical marijuana provisions legally enacted by the states? Remember, the DEA does not even allow testing on marijuana to determine whether marijuana has any medical benefits. Anecdotally, munchie weed really gives you the munchies and overcomes any sickness that you may have. And that's from a friend of mine that partakes. All right, remember last week when I talked about Russia's Putin stating that there would be revenge for the terrorist attack at Moscow's airport? Well, let's just watch how these things progress, at least as much as the media lets us see. From February 8, 2011, Austin American-Statesman, Chechen rebels claim they attacked airport. A website affiliated with Chechen rebels says insurgent leader Doku Umarov, has claimed responsibility for last month's deadly suicide bombing at Russia's largest airport. All right. A website affiliated with Chechen rebels says insurgent leader Doku Umarov has claimed responsibility. So a website affiliated with the rebels says that this guy claimed responsibility. The Kavkaz Center website says it received a video late Monday, which they didn't show, in which Umarov says he ordered the January 24th attack at Domodedovo airport that killed 36 people. Russian investigators say the bomber was a 20-year-old man from the Caucasus region that includes Chechnya. So the Russians do their own linkage to continue their civil liberty crackdown based on self-made enemies, just like we do with linking any murder in Mexico or on our border with drug cartels. They just never linked that the legalization of drugs would eliminate any profit motive and therefore any reason for a drug cartel to traffic in a legal product. Separately, this is a quote, "Windows gives me the family that nature never could." This was out of a commercial for Windows by Microsoft on February 5th, 2011, advertising on a house rerun. This woman goes to the cloud to fix the photo that she took of her family so that she would never have to be embarrassed again. I have to ask, have we lost something? We can fix any image, any photo, any video. I mean, I guess it seems that publishing photographs of the inside of your home and relationships is like holding hands in public, except public is now on Facebook. I have to ask, do people still hold hands in public? That's all there is today. I want to thank our sponsors, all of which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of this conversation. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesis, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. She can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. TicoAdventureLodge.com, T-I-C-O AdventureLodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica that has the Extreme Pong Room 3.1. CNC Surf School in Samara at www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, a great sunset bar and restaurant in Samara. Ambar Tequila at www.santospirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. Another cool little hotel in Samara at www.villablancasamara.com. They also have the Logan. And of course, the Delicate Genius in Houston, who is a platinum sponsor. Thanks for coming out.